Let's now cross over to Sinovate's headquarters, where a report is being released on what issues Kenyans consider most pertinent at the moment. And you can't get away from that handshake between President Uhuru Kenyatta and NASA leader Raila Odinga. What impact has it had on the nation? Let's listen in.
By and large, corruption is there, 10%, poor leadership is there, tribalism there. So there are, 20, 25% who are looking at broader governance issues, but the vast majority, 3/4 or more, it's the economic issues. Maybe if the Political Parties Act allowed for small subnational parties rather than requiring them all to be national in some way, we would have more interest group parties focused on particular policies. Maybe some just for, let's say, coastal fishermen. But as far as I know, the Political Parties Act does not allow for such sectoral parties. So you try to get the lowest common denominator in order to be competitive. Again, on the economy, how do people view their household or economic conditions over the last 3 months? More than half, 58%, say that it worsened. And of course, the last 3 months goes back to Christmas time, really. Mid-December. Rather more Jubilee supporters say that their conditions have improved, twice as many, 19% versus just 8% of NASA opposition supporters, and the other way around in terms of conditions having worsened. Again, there's a correlation with household income, not huge, but it's definitely measurable, that the wealthier you are, the more likely it is that things have gotten better for you and your family over the last 3 months. And the poorer you are, 60% at the lowest income level, a higher percentage who say that things have gotten worse over the last 3 months. Going back to just after the 2013 election, not much of a change from where things were in November 2013, 60% in terms of worsened, 58 now. But you can see that prior to the election, when we had food shortages, higher prices for basic staples like maize and sugar, and the worsened figure went up to 76%. It came down right before the election to 65% and has now declined further to 58% of those who've worsened. But in terms of households whose economic conditions have improved, now at 14%, that's really lower than most of all the figures that we've managed to get over the last 4 years. One time in May, it was down at 7%. I can't see any other figure below 14 than that. So there's still plenty of room for improvement. Overall, when we ask about Kenya's direction, between a half and 2/3 say the country's going in the wrong direction. Only a quarter, 24%, say the country's going in the right direction. And here we see even a bigger contrast between supporters of Jubilee and NASA. Of course, what's in people's minds when they think about right direction, it goes far beyond the economy, as you'll see in a moment. So here we have 8 times 5. We've got 4 times as many Jubilee supporters saying the country's going in the right direction, but still only 1/3 of them. So you might ask, why would Jubilee supporters, having seen their leaders win the last election, not be more positive about the country's direction? And hopefully that question will be answered by the time we finish this presentation. And more than twice as many opposition supporters of the view that the country is going in the wrong direction, 83 versus 42. Across the regions, the highest level of optimism about the country's direction on the far left in the 2 Jubilee stronghold regions of Central and Rift Valley, and the lowest in the stronger opposition area of Nyanza, but also pretty low in Nairobi, eastern and western as well, where the red bars are much higher than the green ones. Looking at the reasons that people gave for the country being in the right direction and the reasons in the wrong direction, now we see much bigger contrasts. Cost of living, mentioned by more than 1/3 of those thinking the country's going in the wrong direction. Who are the 8% who gave that as a reason for the country going in the right direction? Maybe they're people who've, I don't know, are hoarding agricultural crops, knowing that they can get a better price if the drought continues. I'm not sure who those people would be. Far more people mentioning infrastructure of those who think the country's going in the right direction, 20%, versus only 2 who would mention infrastructure development problems as the main reason for the country going in the wrong direction. And keep in mind, again, this was a single response question, so people could only mention one. Any other major contrast there? Very positive for education. Corruption, 10 times more people mention that of those who think the country's going in the wrong direction. Shouldn't surprise anybody, and so we've just calculated the difference in the right-hand column. I don't think there's anything else there that calls out for attention at the moment. The country's direction over the last 5 years now, 4.5 years, we can see a marked improvement since our October survey, which was, of course, completed, well, it wasn't of course, but it was completed just before the repeat election. So there was a lot of uncertainty in the country in October last year on both sides of the political divide, generating the highest wrong direction score we've ever got. And we sent that out to all you people in the media houses, and we didn't see any coverage. Maybe you were censoring yourselves. Right before the election, the wrong direction and right direction were almost even, or much closer, 50 versus 38%. And only once over the 4.5 years that we've tracked this did we ever see a plurality, that is a higher number for right direction, and that was in August of 2015, the week just after President Obama's visit, when you Kenyans seemed to have some kind of euphoria that heaven would come down to earth because your lost son, or at least half of him was a lost son, came home. But that euphoria didn't last long. So when you're reporting, it's fine to give the current figures, but I think your readers, listeners, and viewers will get a little more out of your stories if you put it in the context of a trend over time. Coming now to the president's performance, or rather the perceived quality of his performance over the last 3 months, we see that half of Kenyans give him a thumbs up, 50% overall, 40% are not so happy, 7% are not sure. And not surprisingly, we see a marked contrast where most, but certainly not all, of those who identify with Jubilee, 4 out of 5, say they approve. And it makes you wonder, those 13% who do not approve, why are they not very satisfied with the president's performance over the last 3 months? And on the opposition side, we get a fifth of them who are satisfied, or were, because this is 2 weeks ago now that we finished the survey, with only 3/4 disapproving of his performance. The reasons for approving and disapproving, again, you can see contrast as we saw with the Kenyan direction. The biggest one was on corruption and governance, where those who disapprove, 31% mentioned that, again, in a single response question, and only 3% approved of him and gave that as the reason, presumably anti-corruption efforts. But the development responses are overwhelming among those who approve. Education, infrastructure. He also gets high marks for his cabinet and other appointments that he had made recently. That's at 12% with his Big Four agenda on the economy and development in general. On the negative side, as I said, corruption, nearly a third mentioned that. Other higher mentions, economy and development, 12%. So it's the same for both sides of the political divide with regard to that one. And a number of others which are also mentioned, as you can see. President's approval over time, this is going back nearly 4 years, 3.5 years, November of 2014. And we see that before the election, in May 2 months before, the negatives were a little higher. Right before the election, early July, he was on the positive side. And basically, there's been no change since early July, since, as I said, the margin of error, better late than never, it's not your fault. The margin of error plus or minus 2.2, we can say it's unchanged, the approval rating of the president since early July. Now turning to the coming 5 years, we had a couple of questions about people's expectations regarding the political situation in the country. And we're presenting, I think, 2 or 3 of them here now. First of all, we asked, what do you think is the main challenge the Jubilee government will face over the next 5 years? A single response question. We didn't read these off. It's open-ended. And controlling the opposition was most frequently mentioned. Interestingly, more frequently by Jubilee supporters than opposition supporters. So the Jubilee supporters are looking over the fence and are a bit more worried at the opposition supporters than the opposition supporters are and looking at themselves in the mirror for some reason. Opposition, NASA supporters, a little more concerned about controlling the budget, the public wage bill, and also about political instability. And remember, 80% of these surveys were done before the handshake. We also asked, related to that, which government, political body, or NGO do you think will be most effective in holding the national Jubilee government accountable to the Constitution and the laws over the coming years? The opposition in Parliament scored the highest, nearly 4 out of 10, and hardly any difference between Jubilee and NASA supporters on this. Interestingly, but perhaps not a surprise, judiciary received the second most mentions, 16%, slightly higher among opposition supporters. And of course, we can assume people were thinking about a number of court orders that the government was unhappy with, as well as the nullification of the August 8th presidential election, even if they affirmed the repeat election result from October 26th. But also frequently mentioned, we're getting some mentions, the county governments, citizens themselves, civil society, NGOs, and you folks in the media, and so on. I don't think we've asked this question before, but we thought it was interesting, and we'll ask it next time as well. And then also, we've already heard talk about the next election. People in Kenya say the next election campaigns begin the moment the results of the current one are over. So we read off, and this was prompted, we read off a list of names, and we asked people, how likely do you think it is that each of the following will ever be president? Ever, not necessarily in the next election. And the highest rating by far is the current deputy president, William Ruto. 30% thought it's completely certain, no doubt. With smaller percentages thinking his future chances of being president are either somewhat likely, not very likely, but still possible, or certainly impossible, certainly not. Followed by Senator Gideon Moi, Governor Ali Hassan Joho, Raila Odinga, and 2 other NASA principals, and then Machakos governor. And the reason we put the Machakos governor and Governor Joho in is both of them have announced their intentions to vie for the presidency. So we didn't just pick these names out of the air, or rather we took them out of the air of public discourse. Of course, remember 80% of these interviews, again, were conducted before the handshake. Whether that makes any difference, we leave to see. Now, another major public issue that we covered in this survey was the swearing in of the former Prime Minister at Uhuru Park on the 30th of January. Obviously, that has created major effects. And as I said, I was watching People in Politics on NTV this morning, and there was a lot of discussion about that with relation to the handshake as well.
A lot of interesting talking points coming from Tom Wolf, lead researcher, IPSOS, even as he releases that survey. Most serious problems facing the country at this moment, according to Kenyans, include high cost of living and inflation, unemployment, hunger and drought. How Kenyans view their economic conditions? Well, Jubilee supporters say condition has improved. 49% of Kenyans say it has worsened, while 34% say condition is the same. Let's talk a bit about the direction the country is moving in. He stated that a half to two-thirds of those polled say the country is moving in the wrong direction, while 1/4 say the country is moving in the right direction. Now, they go into specifics of asking those who they polled which party they support, and of course, Jubilee versus NASA, and they got different results depending on that. They also asked Kenyans, in terms of the country moving in the right direction, on corruption, that was posed to them. On infrastructure, those were some of the talking points that came out. In terms of the president's perceived performance over the last 3 months, 50% gave him a thumbs up. The remaining 50% were not happy. In terms of the next 4.5 years, 5 years expectations, what were some of the main issues that Kenyans saw would dominate national conversation? The key one, especially for Jubilee supporters, was controlling the opposition by government. Jubilee supporters concerned by the opposition in regards to that. When you look at 2022 politics, when they asked Kenyans who are some of the front runners, the Deputy President William Ruto came in tops at 30%. We have Senator Gideon Moi, Joho, the Mombasa governor, NASA leader Raila Odinga, although he has not declared that he'll be vying in 2022. Two other NASA principals, so we can assume Kalonzo Musyoka and possibly Musalia Mudavadi also, but Moses Wetangula has also indicated, that he could also be a contender for that top seat, while the Machakos governor, Dr. Alfred Mutua, also came on that list towards the bottom. So those are some of the details that have come out of that survey by IPSOS, that some of the information coming out from Tom Wolf, lead researcher at this moment.